Good afternoon, everyone. I am Anto Budiarjo. This is Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're trying to figure out what the future is for smart buildings and smarter buildings, more accurately. List of the panelists are listed on mondaylive.org. Important note here is the views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do post comments and questions on chat. And we also would very much like to get some of you to come on the panel this week as part of this conversation. So if you want to do so, chime up on chat. And this deck is on mondaylive.org if you see anything that any links that you would like to follow. So the theme for this month is reconfiguring the BAS industry, and we're really sort of asking the question: what is going on here? And the way we're sort of framing the discussion, last week's discussion, continuing this week, is really what one thing do each of us see is needed for the industry to change. And we had that discussion last week. We didn't quite get through all of the panelists here, so we want to have a part 2 of that today, and also open to others to join in if they feel they have something to contribute. But before we get into that, hand it over to Mr. Sinclair. What's going on?
Thank you very much. We have our March issue up. Of course, that is our Women Creating Amazing Opportunities issue. It's been well received. I think the diversity piece has worked well. We've got a whole bunch of involvement with a bunch of groups that we don't normally get involved with. We're now hard at creating our April issue, which is reinventing, reconfiguring, refiguration, and forced evolution, which kind of builds on the Monday Live theme. The industry is immersed in deep change. Share your take on what you see as the significant changes that will occur in the near future. And just to recap on my take from last Monday, I believe one of the biggest problems we have is just simply communications, trying to keep us all on the same page as to what is changing, not necessarily on the same page, but just to understand what other pages there are out there. So I think it's a more important job for automated buildings. And looking at that, I've been poking around, and this CABA YouTube came across on the AI predictive maintenance. And I've been a member of CABA forever. Actually, even before automated buildings, I was involved in CABA. So it's been a long-term relationship, and it's good to see that CABA is hard at reinvention as well. New website, new CEO. It's good to see that change is occurring in that area as well. So pleased to help feature their event here. It's a think tank. Hosted by Harbor Research. It's kind of pointed more at the predictive maintenance in AI. From our news page, there's some information there as well from the folks. I did an interview with Facilio, and we came up with this statement that we need to understand that AI and sustainability are not things, they are journeys that we need to embark on. And I think we keep trying to make them into physical identities, but they're not. They're just thoughts and ideas of how to do things, and we have to just weave them into the fabric of what we're doing moving ahead. I think that's about it. Looking forward to today's show. Back to you, Anto.
Great. I think the word for that is memes. They're memes. But anyway. Next up, Mark, you're muted.
So I've got 2 that I thought was interesting to share, and they're both government related. So early, I think it was end of last week, the Senate passed the Cybersecurity Act. and it's going to the House, which I do believe will pass, will force organizations to report cyber attacks. And I think that's kind of interesting. Obviously, government is, but I think also they're trying to have discussion in and around high profile accounts on the private sector as well, whether it be banking, financial, et cetera. So what I'm getting out of this is that we're beginning to start to see, beside things like the NIST framework and guidelines and all that on how to keep stuff secured and what we should be doing, is now seeing this part of it, which is the business side of this, and trying to get some guidance and heading towards some kind of standards or something related to cybersecurity. And the second one is that the Biden administration launched a new effort to improve ventilation and reduce the spread of COVID-19 in the buildings. And I was kind of really enjoyed this, because if we go back to our start in Monday Live, that was the premonition of why we started, was because of COVID back in the day. But the fact that it's not being ignored, even though it seems like, we're in a different phase of dealing with COVID than we were, when we first started and all this. So again, two important things that the government is at least trying to hang their hat on, that I hope will also then move over to the private sector as well. So there you go. That's my two for today.
Thank you. John.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so two stories I thought were interesting. First of all, with the gas prices, and I missed a few of our events here, but obviously dramatic change in gas prices and an incredible focus on EVs. I happen to have one in the family, and a coworker just went and bought one today, and the dealership charged $6,000 over list, and he went and did it anyways. But this article was interesting. It came from Wired magazine, and what was interesting about it is it's a perfect time for it, but it's a terrible time because the shortages of technology and chips and a variety of other things that it takes to build them are holding them back significantly. So it would be a great time, and it would probably make a much bigger impact on changing the percentage of EVs out there, except you can't get them. The person I know who did that went to the car he bought and paid that was because the other one he was looking at were some number of months out before he could get one. All right, so that's interesting, right? It should be a perfect time. And then the other side, I feel like I see more focus and resonance with Energy Star. It's been out there for a long time, and Portfolio Manager. They expanded to water, greenhouse gas, and this is an article about plants, manufacturing plants that reached award levels in their energy performance. So I just thought that was interesting to see that out there. You may want to look, audience may want to look at some of those stories. Again, good apparent momentum around GHG driven focus on energy efficiency as part of what we need to do to improve our GHG performance. So that's what I get.
So John, let me ask you this, or the group, sorry, is that on your EV remarks here, one of the things I'm beginning to see, and I'm starting to see it in specifications and stuff, are actual EV charging stations becoming part of the building operating platform or the building operating system, whatever you want to see. And in fact, we're actually 5 RFPs that we're working on, 4 specifically bring up EV charging stations. And I think we're going to, my thoughts is I think we're going to start seeing more and more of those, that they are not a nice to have, that they are going to be must have and expected, especially at Class A office buildings and things like that. So
Yeah. Well,
be curious what other people think or say, you know.
yeah, we've been involved in some of that recently. So, you know, when you look at charging stations, there's really two types, right? There's the Electrify America and equivalent, which is like a gas station for plugging in cars, right? But then there's the thing you're talking about, which is normal businesses, normal facilities adding charging stations. And right there, you have the integration, intersection, or interoperability issue between we're installing these chargers, they can have a significant demand impact. How is that being considered in relation to the normal demand profile of the building? And is it being managed, orchestrated, optimized, or it is just like, oh, 5 people plugged in their car, and now we're paying a $10,000 demand spike for the next 11 months. Oh, I wish we thought of that beforehand, right? So the ones that are getting added to existing facilities have a direct, relationship with the energy supply and energy rates and demand performance of those buildings. And that is a area where that people are really just beginning to start looking at, whereas we have the Electrify America or the Tesla supercharger stations. Those are standalone, right? They've got their own deal with the utility company, and they're not impacting the building that might be near them. So
Yeah,
I'm curious, are there anybody seen any legislation or offers from the utilities to exclude the EV charging from the demand?
Haven't seen that because it's going to impact the grid, right? You do it, it's going to have an impact, right? I think the real issue, the real opportunity is going to be interoperability so that you can manage. You can do a lot of different things with those chargers. You don't have to let all 5 charging stations flow at full capacity when that happens. So you end up with, okay, we're going to have to reduce, or, what's the maximum we want to draw we make at this time of the day, right?
But also the opportunity of the electricity to go the other way from the cars to the building at those peak
in
times.
the buildings, yeah.
Which can actually be.
There's a manufacturer out there of EV stations or technology that is tying their solution with demand response and all this other stuff, which I think is pretty darn cool when you think about it, to your point, John.
Yeah.
To your point.
It's going to have to be dealt. It has to be dealt with, right?
Now, like I have an EV, when I go stay at hotels, sometimes that influences my decision where I stay. So it's starting to be in demand more and more, and it will, flow over to the workplace. And of course, the government's going to drive a bunch of this stuff anyway, but.
Yeah, and a couple of major retailers, restaurants, Taco Bell, an example, and some Starbucks are all putting in EV stations now. And I don't mean one, like Taco Bell, one of their largest franchise, is putting between 5 and 8 at all of their particular locations. So they're trying to create that extended experience. That's all part of where they see the value coming.
And Alexandra just commented that this is an interesting topic. Indeed, it is. Maybe we need to cover it at one of the Monday lives. That'd be great.
Definitely.
Moving on to Anno.
Hold on, I was muted. I want to say one quick thing. I was muted. I apologize, Anno. 2 things, actually. So I'm out here in California, and all they talk about is, look, guys, on the radios, you hear it all day, TV. Hey, we have plenty of energy. But don't do anything from 4 to 9 if you can.
Yeah, right.
Kind of interesting. I found that interesting. And the other thing I'm driving a Tesla around LA this week, and I realized it's not only the gas savings. Gas is $7 a gallon out here. I just learned, and this is probably a duh, but you also don't have to do any maintenance on a Tesla. There's no oil changes, none of that. I'm like, wait, I never even contemplated that. So anyway, that snapped this week.
I gotta say, I love it, Bill.
Yeah.
It's not the best manufactured car that I've ever had necessarily, but it is my favorite car I've ever had by far.
Yeah, cool.
By a long shot, not just a little.
Yeah. I just had an oil change on my normal ICE car, right? You know what that is, right? Internal combustion engine. $99 for an oil change now.
Wow.
99.
Yep. To have somebody do it with 6 quarts, $99 now is the rate. So,
And you can do that while you're sitting in your car now too, right, John?
yeah, you can do that. You can give them, yeah, you can sit there and give them $100, no problem, right from the front seat. So,
For the 10 minutes.
but yeah, haven't had any of those types of bills with the electric.
I know.
Tesla's going to make a big impact as they're opening up their Austin Gigafactory next month. So that's about to come online. Yeah, just some more on just some interesting facts again about where prop tech investment was. We talked about this, I think, several times about there's a lot of money flowing into the prop tech market, as you can see by Metaprop. If you guys know who Metaprop is, it's one of the bigger property investment groups. Some interesting numbers there that jump out at you. High confidence, high lot numbers are still growing. I thought that last bullet point was really interesting, and 25% of staff expecting to hire 20 or more full-time employees in the upcoming year. You know, these are, you know, obviously, you know, software developer type guys too. So that's a big pull on the market. Largest increase since 2016. So talks well to the space. And again, I think my message here is more about the impact that all this money flowing into the prop tech space is going to do into the marketplace, right? It's going to create some interesting and compelling solutions. Not all will be successful, of course, but.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So there is a new member of Monday Live. He's still in training right now, so he's not able to join us today. His name is Monty. So hopefully you'll be able to see him at some point in the coming weeks. But continuing on this sort of what Mark was talking about earlier in terms of government and sort of related entities pushing a lot of things that we're talking about, as SEC has proposed a climate disclosure that is being written about. This one's on Washington Post, but obviously it's been written about in many other publications. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So moving on, just to put another plug on the Division 25 collaboration that's happening on Tuesdays at noon Eastern time. That's going really well. We had our second meeting last week, and we'll have a third one tomorrow. So if anyone wants to join this group, please ping me on chat or email me, or otherwise DM me. So any other thoughts before we move on?
Monty needs a bow tie.
Okay, thank you. All right, so reconfiguring the industry. So we asked this question last week, and we're going to continue asking this question today. What single change would make the biggest difference to improve the industry? Why that change, the impact, how are you preparing, and optimism of it coming to fruition? So that's kind of the question of the day. So Mark, John, Steve, you weren't with us last week, so one of you want to start?
Are you saying just you're only looking for one answer?
One for each, from each of us.
For each, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I meant, all right. Well, for me, I look at it, the shift going from the technology side to the business side. I think it's being where we're going and what is going to drive us to from now through the next many years is a more concerted look at the business side, the business ramifications of the technology, the solutions, and everything that we all provide, or this industry provides. And reason being is that the technology is for sure important and is the enabler. But I think as we are asking our systems, and the owners and the operators are asking us to make their buildings smarter, perform better, so forth and so on, is that means they're looking at it from the business side. And I think we as an industry owe it to ourselves to really chat up the business side of this, not just the technology side.
I'm not sure anybody's going to disagree with that. I think that's what the whole smarter stack was kind of going down the path of not looking at technology and sort of figuring out all of the pieces.
Well, yeah, and it's also, you know, it's outcome driven, it's results driven, not just, all right, let's save energy. Okay, great, but what does a savings of energy of 15% actually mean from a outcome perspective, from a business perspective, and to the business, to the operation of a building or those buildings or whatever the case is. And I still think that we as an industry go and sell on, oh, this fabulous technology, but we're not communicating as much as we should, the outcomes, the results, and the extended outcomes and results, not, oh, let's just save energy. That's what I mean. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll try to tie it together with actually a true anecdote from a conversation I had with a potential client this morning who's embarking on trying to understand how to digitally transform their building stock, and they have quite a few buildings. And I agree, the business case is what they're focusing on, and what this person shared, because we're just a piece of the thing they're trying to do, right? Which is another point I want to make, is where can you put guaranteed, or not guaranteed, but definable returns on some of the things you need to do to move your building stock forward, right? You're going to need connectivity. What's that going to cause for return? Well, nothing. It's going to prepare you for the next step. You're going to need some cybersecurity. What's the return on that? What's the return on the investment there, Bill, for those things, right? I mean, they're murky, right? They don't, and this gets to a point Jim often mentions. It's the procurement process and mentality of how they look at these things. They still have, even if they don't think they're saying it, they still have a capital investment mentality, right? So if I buy this thing from you, I will save what? Well, there's so many things to get to smarter buildings, and not all of them have a directly associable return, right? And this person I'm talking with, somebody I know, he's trying to help his organization work through this, and he was sharing the difficulty of getting to what the people who would sign off want versus what the technology and service providers can possibly provide, right? There's a mismatch, and none of it's driven by malintent. It's a complex problem, right? And one of the other points I'd make is, the bullet was, move the BAS industry forward. And yet one of the early slides we had was about prop tech. There's a lot of stuff in prop tech where most of the investments are going, has nothing to do with building automation, basically, other than it may want to connect to it for data. And I think there's a confusion or lack of understanding about that. I mean, you could put in or improve a building automation system and improve the performance of that building, make it smarter, and not do anything with any of these other prop tech opportunities, solutions, et cetera. And boy, for people who we continue to learn are running buildings and aren't tied to the technology, how do they separate all of this or understand it all? That's where the barrier is. I mean, this client we're talking with, they want to do this, and they're just saying how they get stuck in the mud trying to get through to what they are going to need to sign off on anything. So I don't have a solution, just maybe a view on the problem.
So John, just picking up on what you said, my 2 cents has to do with the IT-OT convergence. And if building owners started thinking of OT the way they think of IT, then what I mean by that is they view IT as a cost of business. You can't run your company without an investment in IT.
Right.
Number one. Number two, they expect to spend more every year on IT. Number three, however IT is doled out by the industry, i.e. subscription models versus CapEx, they just go along with it because they basically aren't given much of a choice. And cyber. IT has to have cyber protection. So guess what? So does OT. So maybe part of the way to have these conversations with the owners is to draw the comparisons. You really shouldn't think of your OT systems fundamentally as any differently than how you think about your IT technology investments. You got to have it, and you got to run it, and you got to buy it in very similar fashions. So it's, we get caught up in the technology, our technology. So as an example, I'm doing a little consulting now for a data analytics company. So you, John, obviously you and Jim are both in that business. And so I've never actually spent any time digging into the weeds of what you guys do. And now I'm starting to dig in the weeds. And one of the things that this company is struggling with is very fundamental. Why do I even need it? Right? So think about this. We've been doing building automation for 3 decades. We're going into decade number 4. What do you mean my building automation system doesn't do this stuff already? I've been doing this for 3 decades. Come on. So I need this other thing, this analytics stuff? Really? How come? And so just that fundamental question to be answered is still out there with a lot of building owners. I'm not saying you guys haven't had some success and that you've convinced a number of your clients that they got to have this stuff, but there's a huge part of the market, and we've talked about making analytics a requirement. That's part of our goal here is to have it built into 75% of the jobs instead of 5% of the jobs. Well, what I'm finding quickly is that a lot of the potential companies don't understand why they even need it. So we got such a fundamental case to be made just there to help them understand, because again, making the analogy to IT, AI and big data has been around now for 10 years, more, and businesses are making the case every day why they got to have the data and what they're going to do with the data and how they're going to optimize their business and make it run better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's another example of how we can use IT to sell the OT story.
Yeah, I'm gonna suggest, Steve, you're not using IT to sell the OT story. What you're doing is you're relanguaging and creating a new communication paradigm. And I thought it was brilliant what you said, frankly. I'm going to use that. All right. It's really brilliant. So it's languaging. Like, what did they do in the digital twin? They created a thing called digital twin. Everybody's like, ooh, got to have that. Like, what? We've been doing that for years. Look what the panel, look what the guests are saying. Change it from data analytics to data accounting. Change the languaging, change the communication paradigm. Mark's been saying that for a long time. I like what you said, man.
But also the thought that I had was that in IT, there is a lot of data analytics happening. There's a lot of data. So I'm a little puzzled by that, but sorry, Jim.
No, I was going to say that apparently John and I haven't been very successful over the last 20 years in educating the market and bringing people along as to what it is and why it's needed. But Steve, I mean, that point is extremely well taken. But, the problem is that it could be extended to a fundamental misunderstanding of what we do as an industry at large, not just analytics. I think therein lies a very important point to make.
But, and John, my point of bringing up that prop tech side is for that very reason that you just mentioned. All that money is going to go into those companies that are just going to continue confusing the marketplace. That's part of the challenge we're going to have, right? I mean, because they're, probably most of the ones who are getting a lot of that funding, and they all have analytics or AI, ML, or some other buzzwords as part of their whole spiel. And just as an example, I talked with somebody I was looking to do some work with only late last week out of the Europe marketplace, and went to their website and said, we do everything about data analytics for the building, and we do data capture and ingestion. I go, okay, this sounds interesting and compelling. And we had a chat with him, And it was nothing to do with our space. I mean, it was so orthogonal to what we were doing. It made sense in the context of his message, and it made sense in what he was trying to, articulate to a building owner. But when you really drill down to it, I'm like, yeah, I get what you're doing, but you're kind of confusing using the same words that others are using for a different thing. You know what I mean? And so, that's comes back to that whole education. And I worry about that, billions of dollars into the prop tech, because it's just going to continue to add more confusion to the marketplace and not help in a lot of ways.
We're all hard at
what's-
building the Temple of Babylon.
I think what's important, I mean, we've identified these problems, we've talked about them for many years, but the key thing is how do we change it? What are the levers that we can pull on? If you look at the analytics story, over that 20-year period, we didn't have an analytics value proposition when we started. So what did we do to start? We dressed it up as an energy services value proposition, and we sold energy savings as if it was an ESCO energy conservation measure, and used that to justify the analytics. If we look at, Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, that got us the early adopters. But now we're into main market, and main market, people hear that they need analytics, they're buying analytics. It may or may not be on an energy ROI now. So we're somewhere in that transition. So what I'd love to do is figure out what the levers are and how we can educate people. And on the other conversation I'd like to talk about in one sec is this business end. How do we pivot people to thinking about operational cost instead of capital? But the change is what I'd like to focus on.
And I think, to your point, Jim, one of the challenges I believe we still have is that, well, I've heard what Steve says, IT, OT, I couldn't agree more. And what you and John say, you guys already know, I totally agree and are behind analytics 100%, is that people, the majority of the building owners and operators out there, not the ones with mega campuses, not the ones with big corporate portfolios, but the next tier down and the tier after that going down, is that they take for granted the building operating systems in a building. They walk in their building, oh, it's cool in here. It's okay, the temperature's good, the light's on, let me see, click on or whatever. Okay, I don't have to worry about anything. They're on, they work. The only time I have to worry about it is I get a call from an occupant or a tenant. Then, okay, let's pick up the phone call and call the maintenance people. Hey, we're getting a complaint about this, too hot on the 3rd floor, go fix it. So to me, it's still that mentality. We, as the industry, the owners and operators, take what the performance of their building for granted. As long as those lights are on, they don't care. As long as the temperature is relatively comfortable, they don't care.
Yeah, it goes back. I mean, this person I was talking to, basically in as many words said, I need the 10 slides that show what we're going to do and what it'll save, right? I mean, how do you answer that question, right? When you're talking about making buildings smarter, and some of them need IT infrastructure, some need OT, some have controls problems, others may want to take advantage of new prop tech features for clients about booking rooms and spaces and ordering coffee, and all this stuff's getting thrown together, and it's all very separate, right? I'd go back to the phone analogy, right? I choose an app because I can decide, I can understand what one thing will do for me. I'm able to choose the app because there's already an infrastructure it can run on. But could I have ever understood what, that I needed to buy this whole infrastructure so that I could order coffee, right? I don't think it's getting easier to solve this communication with the building owners.
It's an interesting thought. Here's a thought. I don't know if it's interesting or not, but somebody earlier said, well, all these new companies coming out are going to confuse. It's possible you could look at all the new technology and algorithms and logos and brands coming out as something different, something that could eventually start to communicate to these owners, oh, if I had this basic infrastructure in place, it's like your phone, right? In the old days, it was just to make a call. But now there's so many cool applications. Yeah, I do need a smartphone now because there's so many things to engage. So it could be, I think, Anna, you said that instead of these things instead of us looking at all the new stuff that's coming out of Silicon Valley as confusing, it could just be the context under which building owners might say, all right, well, I guess I do need this stuff. It's pervasive. So it's just another way of looking at it. I don't know if there's any validity to that, but could be.
That
Well,
lines
I
up
don't-
with what Joel just sort of commented, that how often do you talk to the telephone service provider? Typically not until you don't get a dial tone or something's broken. So
Mhm.
so you want to move on to another subject. John, did you have something that you think should change or needs to change?
And we're noodling on that every day to figure out how to convey the
But what's at the
value
top of the list?
yeah, using
Share.
information. Did the people at Target or pick your favorite retailer need to prove to management why they needed to do data analytics on sales? Were they able to determine the ROI ahead of time, or they said we need to understand how people buy, when they buy, what they buy, when should we put the bathing suits on the rack? I'm guessing they didn't have an ROI case at the outset. They've been able to prove it since and show anecdotal, and certainly those of us involved in that can show the anecdotal evidence of when you can connect to data and apply analytics to it. Here's the benefit you'll get. But as I was saying, what that ran up against today was an example of, well, that's not how this management team is used to making decisions, right? So I don't have a good answer of what should change, in any specific way. It's just a slog to keep educating people, and it gets more difficult with all these new apps that come in. If all of the apps were saying, hey, I've got a new app for this, and as long as you have this infrastructure, it works. If they would add that to their story, I think then they could drive the thing Bill was talking about. You'll benefit by having buildings you can connect to. But I don't think many of them want to say that, because that would be like saying, but if you don't, you can't use my new app.
Right.
And the VCs don't want to hear that in the
Right.
same pitch. But if we were all saying it, just like we are on the phone, if you have iOS or Android, you can take advantage. Oh, cool. If you have buildings that communicate via any one of these standard approaches, you can take advantage of that. But the new entrants aren't saying that because it wouldn't sound good. And,
Yes.
and I think that this is where that gap is. We'd all like to get to that future where value-added apps could easily be added to buildings, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
John, picking up on your point, if we went out and educated the market and said smarter buildings can ...
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can't do all these things, can do this, right? But you must have
Mhm. Yeah.
these assumptions that have to be true for smarter buildings to be able to do the promises we just made.
Yeah.
So they must, the system must be interoperable, must be remotely something could connect. The data must be easily acquired, or, but I think that's in fact what we're trying to do with specifying interoperability, is we're saying this is what has got to, if you want to be interoperable, this has to be true.
Mhm.
And with all that being true, now smarter buildings means I can deliver you better efficiency, better use of your people, et cetera, et cetera.
It's really interesting. I love it. I mean, think about where you started and where John just ended us right here.
Yeah.
You started us 20 minutes ago, Steve, with, look, this basic infrastructure should just be, jacks are better to open. Like, it's got table stakes right here.
Yeah.
Oh, and then if that were the case, we could just layer stuff in. And John recognizes that, no, all these new companies are saying, no, we'll be a single platform. We'll do without it. We don't need anything. So you end up with just a mishmash of confusion.
Yep.
Mhm.
So Steve, did you have a different one thing?
No, I did my one thing based already. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I got my one thing.
Okay. So, Cool. So anybody out there, any thoughts of what we've missed or what we haven't talked about? That
Or suggestions on one thing that'll help all of us here, challenged individuals, overcome this simple problem we haven't been able to solve for the last 20 years.
Sorry, it's an interesting question. Just while you're looking for answers, but because you touched on it, John. You know, like yourself and Jim, you've been educating in the marketplace for 20 years. So, you know, my first take was education. Okay, we just need more of education. But you'd have to ask the question: if education isn't working, you know, what's the challenge?
I think the challenge is that we've been talking to ourselves and we've been talking to our customers who happen to be people in buildings. And that's where this conversation really needs to shift. I think John pointed out very accurately that, you know, people have spent trillions of dollars on enterprise applications across the spectrum of everything from finance, operations, healthcare, take your pick. You know, suddenly we get into a discussion about enterprise technology with building owners, and they ask what the ROI is, right? There's the problem right there. That the mentality of the customer is one of two. One, it's a capital asset. I only think about capital because that's what I do. I don't have any other degrees of freedom in my thought process because I'm a capital guy. So if we keep asking the same questions to the same people, we're going to keep getting the same answer. And that's why I advocate for going outside of the system, going to government who's making the same mistake where we can get a voice in, and potentially going to the accounting industry. Once again, who is the arbiter of how these business decisions and capital allocation, who's making those decisions? Big consulting companies, big accounting companies. So I believe we need to engage finance people and educate the finance people as to what the value proposition here, rather than sticking with building owners.
Yeah, I think that's the absolute key, Jim. Change the people that we're talking to.
Well, I think you both are right, changing the people we talk to, because to me, over these last 15, 20 years that many of us have been doing this, our conversation has remained, for the most part, with the same group of individuals, facility managers, folks like that. Yes, slowly but surely, I think everybody will agree, we're beginning to shift, and we have shifted going up into the C-suite higher. And I think that is where the conversations really need to happen. In addition to spreading out to what you just said, Jim, is the C-suite will drive, in my opinion, the action. They may not go looking for the exact solution, but they'll tell somebody, this is what I'm looking to do. This is what we're going to do as a business. Go find it. And so the more we collectively as an industry can have those dialogues with the C-suite, including the financial people, I think that is the road that we would see more adoption. And until we really get down that and have those conversations, I think it's going to be, we're going to be going at 5 miles an hour instead of, we'd like to go at 50 miles an hour.
Really smart. There's I'll paraphrase an old wisdom saying, if the people you were talking to aren't listening, stop talking.
Well said.
Gregory had an interesting comment here. I'd kind of like him to expound on it if he's willing to, either via text or joining us.
You want to join us, Greg?
The data-centric approach as opposed to application-centric approach. I think he's got something he understands there that I'd like to understand better. So if he's willing to tell us more, great.
Yeah, I'm bringing him on.
Great.
While he's doing that, the one thought as you guys were talking that ran through my mind is, I don't think there's a silver bullet answer to this, right? It's going to take a little of all of these different things to really achieve what we envision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Greg, welcome to the panel.
Welcome. Thank
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Mhm. Yeah, I was talking data-centric as opposed to application-centric.
Yeah.
What's happening with application-centric is that vendors like Honeywell and all the rest of it develop their own applications, and then they try and lock you into their applications.
Okay.
Your haystack and things like that, that's application-centric, but what you've done is that you're coordinating across APIs.
Mhm.
A
So-
data-centric system would be there's only one way to get the data. In other words, it's sitting in a database and you pull data out of the database. So instead of an API, the manufacturer is putting the data into a single database, and it's sitting there that now you can just access the database as opposed to have, access this API and then figure out what storage you need and all the other parts that go along with that.
Mhm. Okay.
So,
All right.
So
yeah, and I'm
smart.
just saying, and it just says, and then analytics become data-centric
Mhm.
as opposed to control, which is application-centric. So in control, you're trying to control things in real time so that you're making decisions that people can't make because you've got all this automation that's going on. And that's, I see that's where Haystack and the ontologies where they're using graph databases, that you're looking at nodes and the connections between nodes and how that happens.
Mhm.
That's all happening on a computer.
Mhm.
On the data-centric side, you're just throwing the data into a database and the relationships get developed. I mean, there's tons of people that are doing metadata schemas right now.
Mhm.
And they're saying, okay, here's what you have to collect if you're talking about a VAV box. And here's all the rest.
So the question I'm wondering, listening to this and also looking at your chat, is that I think I certainly understand that, because as sort of technology architects, we tend to think about it as the different applications that need to talk to each other kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's what you're saying needs to be more data-centric. But is data-centric, does that go enough into focusing on the business? Because you can just be totally data-centric in a completely non-business sort of scenario. Just by talking about data doesn't take you to business.
We built the data-centric system for Kentucky. And all we do is just put the data into a database, collecting it from every manufacturer that's out there. And then we convert it to charts and graphs and we say, okay, here's how your control system is operating. Their engineers and their contractors then look at what we feed, that feedback, and they say, oh, I didn't want that to happen. And they fix the programs. And the net result is that over 5 years, we've done 140 different buildings. All of them have had tremendous energy reduction. It's the guarantee. It was all done with an ESPC too, as well. The engineer gave them an ESPC. So over 15 years, they're guaranteed $78 million worth of savings in Kentucky. And they're well ahead of their guarantee. And also it got the ASHRAE first place technical award. So it's not like I'm saying this and it hasn't happened.
But is all that data openly available and anybody else come in? They can somebody else can come in with one of these apps and they take the data. They don't have to go through anything else. So the owner has all the ability to do that.
That's my intent.
Okay. All right.
Well, I was gonna say, that's where I think it lies, is who owns the data. And I believe it's the owner owns his or her data, period. They can decide who to give access to, not give access to, or whatever. But unfortunately, some folks out there who provide solutions, whether they be apps or integration or whatever it is, believe they own the data, and that if the owner goes to share that data they get a no-no or it costs them dearly.
And that's why you put it in your own database. Kentucky owns the database. They manage it. It's
Mhm.
their IT department. It's just a SQL Server database. I mean, there's nothing.
So is the argument something like, hey, building owner, you own a building, you care about what it is, you know, whatever outcome you're actually expecting from that building, but do you realize you also should, or you own the data, right? That is actually has a lot of information about how you can improve your building. So is that what you're talking about? Is the fact that there is a lot
That's
of
what I'm
data?
talking.
Yeah. Just focus on the
Definitely, when you
data.
build
Yeah.
When you build a building and you instrument it, you've
get data.
implied that you have all this stuff that is recorded, all your decisions. Here are the temperatures you were maintaining. Here's the valve operations. Here's, you know, my motor starts and stops. All that data is implicit. And what I found is nobody is keeping it, so I can't go get it. If I want to get the data, I have to have an API to talk to their system and pull it out myself. And it's horrible.
Mhm.
And all I want to do is put it in the database and make it available to everybody.
Craig, just
So-
to make sure I understand, but you want time series data, right? You want that historical record, not just
Yes,
a, you know, a one-time snapshot.
that's the important data, but then you need a whole series of other data. Like you have to say, oh, here's the time series data comes by point.
Mhm.
So my supply air temperature, heating valve, whatever.
Right.
You know, and that's by point, and that all sits in their own. In SQL, I put that all, one point is one table.
Okay.
So that it's just, but then I have another whole, the schema, the metadata schema, what's describing, you know, points to that file. So I can take a look at it and say, oh, that's VAV box 11, that's the supply air temperature. And, you know, you can pull all that information out.
Got it. Yeah, sure.
So can I ask you, Ian, how did this project get funded?
Yeah.
Sorry, how did this project get funded again? Because it sounds, I'm wondering, you say they're saving money, but when the project got funded, was there a guaranteed ROI for collecting data?
Thank you, President Obama. Remember the ARA money?
Okay, so there wasn't though. This didn't get sold on, if we collect this data, this is our ROI. Someone funded, you should do this, which is exactly the problem we were opening with, is that most commercial enterprises can't see their way to make that type of an investment.
Exactly, but when I'm showing at Kentucky with the energy savings and the fact that it all pays back, the lower operating costs of the buildings, that if you have an accounting system, it's great for you because you can now work your engineers and work your control contractors to get the building to operate better, and you can talk very specifically about it. But if you
In retrospect, you can prove it had a return.
Exactly.
We would agree. I would agree. I'll let Jim agree. In retrospect, you can prove that it had a great return. How do you get through a purchasing challenge where they need the guarantee of the return before you have any data to look at, right?
Well, that is what Kentucky had, all of that information. So we went and had that in 2008, and we pulled all the information together and started working with people.
Mhm.
In 2015 was when they decided that they were going to see how this worked, and then they had applied it to their community college system.
Mhm.
But the challenge is that was assisted by Mr. Obama, President Obama. But the problem is how would you do this if there was not, that assist wasn't there? How do you make the argument that you need to collect all the data and have it all in one place, blah blah, everything you said, and that will have a cost to it. How do you justify that cost? I think that's the problem. If you don't have that assist, how do you do that? If the client doesn't understand the value of data.
Yeah, and as I say, we never guaranteed any savings. We just said we were going to collect the data, and Kentucky believed that having the data was going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. We like those customers.
And now we've proved it on a statewide level. And I don't know if I could do it with commercial buildings, although we are, opening up and working with them now. But certainly municipal buildings are really easy to track, and there isn't a school or hospital or, municipal building that is actually storing, collecting their, holding that data available. And we're just saying, if you collect it, you put it in a spot where everybody can access it, then everybody has a chance to go look at it and say, oh, I can fix this problem for you.
So Greg, while you're on, if we were to ask you what your one thing is this your one thing, or is there something else?
This is my one thing. Put it all in a database. I'm trying to work with ASHRAE right now to say, you're spending all your time, and you have 3 projects right now that basically define a metadata schema. You really just need to define how a database looks and put that data into a database so that everybody can access it. Because unless it's a common database, there's no way. It's not a customer-centric solution. It's a vendor-centric solution, because he's figured out how he's going to collect money from the customer, as opposed to the customer saying, this is my problem. You can either fix it or you can't. And if you can't, I can show another vendor the exact same information and see if he can do it. And that's what happened in Kentucky. I don't have all the details on the installation side, because we weren't involved with that at all.
The thing I'd like to
So
point
I
out
can't-
is, Greg, I agree with you. It's a nice vision, but the key problem is you've got to make sure that you've collected all of the data that you're ever going to need, and have a perspective on what that is as to what the problems are going to be. So it's
That's the design of the database.
Exactly. Design of the
And
database.
your database
and
has
the
to
way
be able to collect. It has to be a design build database.
Right. So the design has to be very, very careful. Otherwise, you'll foreclose future analytics opportunities. So
I have a design that works. When I talk about a historical, it is, you not only have to collect the data, but you have to collect all the information about the data. When was the data collected? So everything has to have a timestamp. Who put it in? Who has the rights to review it and all the rest of it? So a historical database has different needs than the BAS control system has in terms of a database, because you're really trying to, the thing is you have to have a system that you can go back after 25, 30 years and still be able to access that data. So you can't have a very complex system for doing that. And it has to be flexible enough to have a standard, but non-standard options.
it also has to evolve as the building sensors and actuators underneath change. So
That's what I was going to point out.
Key element.
Yeah, that's just data though. If it's a number, I'm interested in it. And if it's not a number, that's,
So as
that's
we,
information.
that's great. Really appreciate your perspective, Greg. That's great. As we start to wrap up, anybody want to make last comments from the group? I think this has been a great conversation, obviously continued from last week. So thank you very much, everybody, all the panelists, and thanks, Greg, and thanks everybody in the audience for comments. And we will see you next week. And YouTube will be up tomorrow morning. Bye-bye all.
Thanks.
Adios.
Bye.
Hey, guys.
See y'all.
Communications.